Our mission today is to try and cut through some of the digital noise. We're looking at a core conflict that I think defines the modern internet.
It's a real paradox, isn't it?
It is. It's this simultaneous, overwhelming desire we all have for instant, specialized knowledge. And at the same time, this absolute exhaustion from having to wade through what everyone's now calling AI slop and brain rot.
You've hit on it exactly. It's the paradox of information abundance, but it's been amplified to a point where it feels like a genuine cultural crisis. You have, quite literally the entire history of human knowledge accessible in your pocket. And yet it feels like you spend more time just sifting through scams, misinformation, low-effort content. You spend more time doing that labor than you do actually learning or connecting with anything that feels valuable. We're hitting a wall of digital fatigue.
And that fatigue is fueling what seems to be a global collective cry for something. Well, something better.
Something more human.
Exactly. And that collective cry has sort of crystallized into this cultural movement that we're going to examine today, the Great Mean Reset, or the GMR.
Right. Now, the name itself, it sounds a little unserious.
It does. A demand to go back to 2016-era memes seems, on the surface, a bit silly. But the mission behind it is anything but. This deep dive is going to unpack the GMR as what the sources call a profound sociological barometer.
A barometer for what, exactly?
A movement that reflects this collective yearning for a more authentic, more human-centric digital experience.
And this cultural exhaustion, it's absolutely pervasive. This isn't some fringe rebellion we're talking about. The critique is coming from every demographic.
You see it at the top, from tech leaders like Jack Dorsey advocating for a personal trend detox, consciously pulling back from the feed.
And you see it at the completely opposite end of the spectrum with Gen Alpha. They're the ones dealing with this information overload from birth. And they're the ones who coined the term brain rot to describe content that's had all the intention, all the context, just stripped right out.
So across the board, there's this mounting consensus that the internet, at least in its current state, is fundamentally broken.
It feels broken.
So we need to understand why it feels this way.
Yeah.
What were the economic forces that drove us here? And maybe the biggest question, is a cultural rewind like this even theoretically possible? Let's unpack it all, starting with part one, the crisis of digital exhaustion and the quality deficit. Okay, so we've established this pervasive feeling that the internet is ruined. That's a sentiment we saw across a lot of the source material, but let's clarify the language people are using to describe this degradation. What's the actual difference between slop and brain rot?
It's a great question because they're not interchangeable. They really define the input and then the subsequent outcome.
Okay.
So if we look at the perspective of long-time critical internet users, they feel the environment is now backed up with scams and low-effort content. That low-effort, mass-produced stuff, often AI-generated or just algorithmically optimized with zero human intention behind it, that is the slop.
It's the raw material of the problem.
It is. It's the cheap, overwhelming mass that's flooding all the feeds. And it forces you, the user, to spend more of your limited time just sifting through it, looking for anything of substance. The real tragedy of slop is the labor it imposes on you just to exist online.
So if slop is the low-effort output, then brain rot sounds like the cognitive price you pay for trying to wade through all of it.
That is precisely the sociological diagnosis. Brain rot is a term that was popularized by the youngest generation, Gen Alpha, and it describes the cognitive breakdown that happens after you hit that point of critical user exhaustion.
And burnout.
It's a specific kind of burnout. It represents the fatigue from consuming content that's maybe hyper niche with no context or is just plain meaningless. It's the sign that your critical facilities are starting to give up in the face of this endless low-quality stimulus.
And it affects how you think and talk.
It does. It often leads to conversations and even internal monologues that are based on unintelligible, context-free material you just saw. It is, by definition, the complete opposite of being a well-informed or engaged participant in culture.
And look, this problem existed before. But the widespread availability of powerful AI tools seems to have accelerated this degradation exponentially.
It really transformed a frustrating problem into what feels like an existential one. Experts universally predict that this issue of misinformation, of context-free slop, It's only going to be amplified.
Because the bad actors have better tools now.
They have incredibly powerful tools, whether they're spammers, propagandists, or just corporations obsessed with volume over quality. They can now use these advanced online tools at internet speed on a truly vast, unprecedented scale. This isn't a slow, manual contamination of the well.
It's an instantaneous automated flood.
Exactly. And the sources warn that this continuous battle, the fight to just discern what's real, what's valuable, what's even intended for a human to see, it carries a devastating societal cost.
What's the ultimate consequence, then, for civic life?
Well, it's potentially dire. The view is that technology at the end of the day can't fundamentally improve human nature. So this continuous, exhausting battle against automated misinformation might lead to a point where broad swaths of the public just simply give up on being informed participants in civic life.
They just check out.
They check out. If every article, every video, every comment is potentially generated by an adversarial bot, the mental cost of staying critically engaged just becomes too high, and resignation is the easier choice.
This sounds almost like the dead internet theory. The idea that most of the activity online is no longer human is finally moving from a fringe conspiracy to, well, a documented reality.
It really echoes that theory, and the sources suggest it's being validated more and more by economic reality. The feeling that the internet is overwhelmingly populated by corporate voices, by automated accounts, by content produced solely for an algorithm, that feeling is real.
Why? Because there's no money in stopping it.
Yeah. As one source starkly put it, there appears to be no economic incentive to stop this. The algorithms reward volume, speed, and efficiency. Those are all characteristics of AI slop, not human thought.
So if the economic incentive is actually favoring the bot, then the core issue, as the sources define it, is that corporations are the majority now. What does that really mean for the average user who's just trying to find a human connection?
It means the entire environment is tilted against the individual. The vast majority of the content, the bandwidth, the algorithmic weight, it's all owned by entities whose primary goal is monetization. It's not human flourishing or authentic connection.
It's just about the numbers.
It's all about the numbers. I mean, think about it. Every major platform is driven by ad revenue and user metrics. So when a piece of human-written complex analysis takes 3 days to produce and maybe gets 100 likes.
But a quickly scraped AI summarized piece takes 30 seconds and gets 10,000 algorithmic impressions.
The system is actively punishing the human for their intentionality. The majority of content is now driven by corporate incentive, which makes the human voice, statistically and financially, the minority.
And nothing reinforces that feeling of corporate dominance quite like the sheer volume of commercial messaging we're all drowning in now. Which transitions us perfectly to the second major facet of this crisis, the advertising overload and the complete erosion of trust.
This really brings us back to a historical analogy that is strikingly relevant, the cable TV analogy.
Yes.
We have to remember the original promise of paid cable television. The whole pitch was that you would pay a subscription fee precisely for the privilege of escaping the interruptions of network TV. You were paying for quality, for convenience, for ad-free content.
You were essentially buying back your own attention.
Correct. But then the erosion of that value proposition began. It started slowly. The premium channels were ad-free, but then basic cable started running a few ads. And eventually, cable TV became more ads than show, perfectly mirroring the very network television model that people had migrated away from in the first place.
And the sources are arguing this cycle is repeating itself digitally. The internet today is becoming, as one source put it, pretty much one big ad fest.
It is. It's making it harder and harder to access quality content without some kind of interruption unless you're willing to pay increasing fees for ad-free versions of services that were once free or at least a lot cheaper.
And consumers, who remember that original promise of a less commercialized internet, are just. They're experiencing a total collapse in the perceived value of their subscriptions. We're seeing mass frustration with streaming services or SVODs.
The data on this is crystal clear. Recent surveys show that 47% of consumers feel they already pay too much for streaming services. And a very similar number, 41%, they openly state that the content they're getting is simply not worth the price.
That's a huge disconnect, a total imbalance of value.
And it's getting worse. The overall cost of SVOD subscriptions has increased by 13% in just the past year alone.
But the sources also single out a specific demographic that's feeling this pain point even more acutely. Gen Z and millennials. Why do they see an even more staggering increase?
The increase for Gen Z and millennials was a full 20% over the last year. That's significantly higher than the average. And it's likely because, as digital natives, they're the most subscription-saturated demographic.
They're stacking subscriptions.
Exactly, they're subscription stacking. They tend to subscribe to multiple niche-specific services to build a customized viewing bundle. So they're paying for 5 or more services on average. And these smaller niche providers often have less leverage, which leads to faster and steeper price hikes compared to the consolidated giants. They're paying a premium for highly specialized access, but the perceived quality hasn't kept pace with that rising cost.
So you have this pressure cooker situation. Rising costs, diminishing quality because of all the slop, and overwhelming advertising. This confluence of crises completely changes the media landscape and, I imagine, sharpens the competition for our attention.
It forces a brutal zero-sum competition. I mean, the average audience spends about 6 hours a day consuming media and entertainment. So studios and platforms are fighting tooth and nail for their share of that time and the subscription fees that come with it.
But there's a critical economic shift in where the advertising money is flowing.
That's the key. Most digital ad dollars are now migrating away from traditional pay TV and streaming platforms, and they're moving aggressively towards social platforms.
Which means the competitive landscape has become incredibly unbalanced.
Absolutely. Traditional media studios are now facing competitors, the big social video platforms, that are exponentially larger than almost all traditional film and TV studios combined. These platforms dominate global advertising not just through scale, but through their advanced ad tech and AI capabilities that allow for hyper-targeting.
And this is where the slop meets the dollar.
That's it. Automated content is easily targeted by automated advertising, creating this highly efficient but ultimately soul-crushing machine that traditional media just can't keep up with.
This systemic convergence of AI-driven slop and overwhelming commercial messaging, it feels like the perfect formula for a cultural rebellion. Users are fed up with the noise, and that dissatisfaction leads us directly to part 2, the heart of this. The Great Meme Reset movement itself. Okay, let's dive into the specifics of the movement that's designed to combat this digital exhaustion. The Great Meme Reset, the GMR. It has an active campaign, and it's centered around a very specific symbolic date.
Yes, the symbolic date they've chosen, which they advocate for as the official day of this cultural regression, is January 1st, 2026.
And the campaign is literally lobbying for meme culture to just revert.
To revert back to the cultural, the aesthetic, and the humor standards of 2016. It is quite literally a request for cultural time travel to a point before this digital decline was perceived to be terminal.
And this demand didn't just appear out of nowhere, right? It was a response to some specific recent moments of cultural stagnation and then oversaturation.
That's vital context. The GMR concept really gained traction following what was recognized as a meme drought in March of 2025. A period where high-quality, genuinely viral organic memes just seemed to dry up completely.
And that was immediately followed by a flood.
The opposite. The opposite. A compensating flood of highly forced niche memes in September 2025. It was that combination, the stagnation followed by this visibly artificial overproduction, that really triggered the collective demand for a cultural correction.
So we need to analyze the movement not as a literal plan for cultural engineering, but as something deeper. The sources call the GMR a profound sociological barometer. What specific cultural demand is it actually measuring?
It's measuring a collective demand for authenticity, and that demand is being expressed through nostalgia. It's not a literal plan. I mean, you can't just command culture to regress.
Of course not.
But it is a measure of desperation. The primary motivation here is the emotional comfort of familiarity. This means the motivation isn't strictly about the quality of the humor in 2016. It's about the feeling that the internet of that era was relatively less saturated with corporate content, less dominated by AI, and less financially optimized.
And that transformation of once cringeworthy content into comforting icons is really powerful. It's like nostalgia as activism. You're using the perceived purity of the past to critique the monetization of the present.
Exactly. They are consciously rejecting the manufacturing process, and the specific target of that rejection is what the movement calls forced niche memes.
Okay, so what defines a forced meme?
These are memes created by content creators who are aggressively attempting to force highly specialized, context-free content into virality. They're designed purely for the sake of follower count, financial gain, and algorithmic success, and they often leave the average viewer just confused and exhausted.
Can you give us an example? A forced niche meme versus, say, an organic 2016-style dank meme?
Sure, think about the difference. A 2016 era dank meme, something like distracted boyfriend, it had a clear, relatable structure, it required minimal context, and it propagated organically because it was based on a shared cultural experience.
Everyone got it instantly.
Instantly. A forced niche meme, in contrast, might be hyper-specific, like a reaction image referencing an obscure in-joke from a streaming service's third-tier animated series. And you see five different influencers use it simultaneously with zero genuine context, just to claim a tiny slice of engagement on a trend nobody actually asked for.
So the rejection of that forced content is a clear cultural mandate against the monetization-first approach to all digital creativity.
That's it. Users can recognize when content is created for the algorithm's benefit, not for the human audience's benefit.
And this desire to retreat, to sort of contract away from the overwhelming complexity of today, it marks a fundamentally different kind of turning point for the internet compared to previous evolutionary shifts.
The contrast is crucial for understanding the GMR. When the internet shifted from Web 1.0 to Web 2.0, that was a technological expansion.
Right.
Web 1.0 was the static read-only web. You read your content on GeoCities or AOL. The technological leap to Web 2.0 was about interactivity, the read-write web, which empowered users to become creators via social media. It added exponential complexity, data usage, and user input.
But the GMR is asking for the opposite. It's asking for a cultural contraction, a desire to simplify and retreat.
Precisely. It represents a desire to contract away from the overwhelming complexity, the commercial saturation, and the constant digital surveillance that's inherent in this hyper-monetized Web 2.0 model. Users are yearning for the freedom and the organic creativity of the past, a time when the platforms felt less like surveillance infrastructure and more like community spaces.
We can actually use historical internet turning points to illustrate the power of user sentiment. I mean, think back to the mid-90s in the case of Gopher. It shows how quickly the early internet reacted to a threat to openness.
The Gopher failure in 1993 is a perfect early lesson in this kind of cultural power. Gopher was this popular text-based protocol. It was used heavily by universities and individuals to navigate the early internet.
And it just disappeared.
Disappeared basically overnight. The University of Minnesota, which had developed Gopher, decided to start asking for licensing fees from commercial users. And the user base instantly migrated to the free, open World Wide Web protocol instead.
So the lesson in 1993 was what?
The deep lesson established in 1993 was that open wins over closed when the users feel the open solution better serves their immediate need for information exchange.
But that lesson was seemingly inverted barely a decade later with the rise of Facebook, which proved that a closed system could actually win, provided it had the right strategy.
That's the counterpoint, and it's the paradox of the modern internet. You fast forward to the rise of Facebook between 2004 and 2007. They succeeded by operating as a closed, exclusive network initially restricted to college campuses.
Which created a powerful moat and a sense of community.
A huge one. And they demonstrated that in 2004, closed wins over open, but only if you have a clever community-based growth strategy, massive venture capital backing, and you're optimizing for scale and data extraction, not just information exchange.
So the GMR is operating within this modern paradox. They want the organic, user-driven culture of the Gopher era, the pre-capitalized internet. But they're trying to achieve this within an ecosystem that is structurally designed like Facebook, heavily capitalized and entirely algorithmic.
And that's why a literal reset is impossible. Cultural evolution just doesn't respond to symbolic commands. The analysis confirms that January 1st, 2026 will arrive, but the cultural slate won't be wiped clean.
It can't be.
As one source noted, it's like a brain or a complex ecosystem. Once the internet has been altered, it can't just return to its previous simpler state. The moment, however, is tremendously important because it is successfully acting as a powerful feedback signal, forcing the digital world to adapt to the deep dissatisfaction of its users.
So if we can't go backward, we have to examine the adaptation. How are industries responding to this collective demand for intentionality and authenticity? And that moves us into part 3. The new paradigm, shifting from high-velocity, exhausting virality to this idea of a durable, emotionally resonant vibe culture. Okay, this is where the structural shift becomes really fascinating. We're moving from an era that was obsessed with fleeting viral moments, the frantic trend-jacking era, to something slower, deeper, and more intrinsically linked to mood and emotional alignment. This is the vibe shift.
The strategic change is already confirmed across industry analysis. The phrase is, vibe shifts are replacing fast-moving trends. Marketers and creators are intentionally moving away from the high-velocity, shallow trends that just burn out both the audience and the brands way too quickly.
So the old model was too extractive.
Right. The new goal is long-term emotional coherence. They're shifting towards slower, mood-driven moments that allow for a more sustained engagement.
So if you're trying to operate successfully in this new space, you can't just rely on standard metrics like sentiment analysis or follower counts. You have to decode something much more abstract and, well, persistent.
You have to decode the mood and the energy behind trends, which is often termed vibe coding. It's a sophisticated process. The ultimate strategic goal is to curate these longer-lasting emotional experiences that genuinely strengthen a brand's identity rather than diminishing it through constant frantic trend hopping.
And that's the key difference you're pointing to between trend detox and trend jacking.
Exactly. Let's ground those two terms.
Please, what does frantic trend jacking look like versus a strategic trend detox?
Okay, so trend jacking is when a brand spots a high-velocity, fleeting TikTok sound or dance and forces its product into that trend within 48 hours. Often poorly, just to gain some algorithmic visibility, regardless of whether the trend actually aligns with their brand identity.
It's desperation.
It is. Trend detox, in contrast, involves taking a deliberate break from those frantic current events. It means saying, you know what? We will not chase that fleeting sound. Instead, we're going to focus on producing original, high-quality, authentic content that is true to our long-term identity and vibe.
Even if it means missing out on a short-term visibility spike.
That's the trade-off. But the detox approach is what builds durable trust over the long term.
Now, here's what I find to be the delicious irony of this whole movement. AI caused the slop, it accelerated the degradation, but the new power move in combating digital exhaustion actually involves transparency about using AI.
That is the core tension. Transparency is rapidly becoming the essential creative currency. Marketers have fully embraced AI for efficiency, but that means the new power move is teaching, showing your work, and creating a culture of transparency by explicitly sharing your AI prompts.
It's not just a courtesy, it's a necessary step.
It is. It's to prove the human intention, the thoughtful input that's behind the automated output. It establishes a level of trust that simply presenting a clean, automated result can never achieve.
That focus on visible human intention leads directly to the mandate for authenticity and personality, which is apparently rewriting the rules of marketing and content creation.
Absolutely. Traditional marketing emphasized this rigid cross-channel consistency, the same uniform voice and style across your website, your Twitter, your Instagram. But the evolution of social media, which is driven by this desire to escape slop, is proving that audiences respond far better to authenticity and relevance.
So, above all else.
Above all else, people are on social media to be entertained, not just informed. This means creators and brands have to allow more personality to shine through, even if it occasionally breaks those rigid, old-school brand guidelines.
And this shift is deeply linked to the rise of the independent content creator, who is now competing directly with legacy media and traditional celebrities. It feels like younger audiences are spending more time and building more trust with these accessible, authentic creators than with distant, polished celebrities.
That trust is built on 3 key mandates, which together form this new creator trust model. The first one is all about respecting the audience's most valuable asset, their time. This is the mandate of not wasting time.
Get to the point.
Exactly. Content is valued because audiences trust the creator isn't going to force them to sit through 5 minutes of preamble for a 60-second factual summary. Efficiency is a sign of respect.
The second mandate strikes at the heart of why legacy media often struggles with trust, and that's radical transparency about errors.
This point is transformative. The traditional media model is to avoid admitting small errors publicly unless you are legally required to issue a major correction. But the creator trust model reverses this completely. The practice of admitting errors publicly, the process of just saying, you know what, I got that wrong, I'm sorry, I'm human, I'm fixing it, it builds immense, almost immediate trust. Because it's so unusual in the audience's typical experience of the polished media machine, it instantly humanizes the creator.
And we're not talking about correcting a major geopolitical inaccuracy.
No, not at all. It's about correcting a small factual error in a recipe or a historical date. The vulnerability itself becomes the source of the credibility.
And the third mandate, this one addresses the core economic crisis of trust we discussed earlier, disclosing sponsors and financial influence.
This is completely non-negotiable for maintaining trust in this new environment. Creators have to be absolutely transparent about how they are monetized. This includes disclosing traditional brand deals, but also political PAC money, dark money entities funding their content, any commercial relationship that might influence their message.
And often they have to go a step further, right?
Yeah.
And explain their personal reasoning behind accepting a specific deal.
They do. Can I walk you through an anecdote that really highlights the difficulty and the necessity of this radical transparency?
Please do.
Certainly. There was one creator, highly trusted by their audience, who accepted a sponsorship with Pizza Hut. Now, they felt they had successfully navigated the ethics of this because the deal was related to a charitable program focused on childhood food insecurity, a topic that was personally resonant for the creator.
Okay, that sounds reasonable on the surface.
It does. But they immediately faced intense backlash from their audience, who argued that any deal with a major corporation inherently compromised their anti-capitalist stance or their alignment with certain boycott movements.
So what was the creator's required response to rebuild that trust? They couldn't just delete the post and pretend it didn't happen.
No, that would have been fatal. They had to engage in radical transparency. They released a detailed, lengthy explanation of the personal reasoning behind their acceptance, detailing their specific emotional ties to the cause and their justification for accepting that specific brand's money.
So the act of sharing their decision-making process, the internal conflict, that ended up building more trust than the initial post lost.
It did. It forced the consumer to understand the creator's complex decision tree. And this complexity brings us to the most corrosive element of trust erosion: the hidden influence, often from dark money entities.
That's the real threat to the human mandate.
It is. What's most corrosive is the high number of creators being paid without disclosure by political action committees or PACs or wealthy individuals who are pushing an agenda. The sources point out a deep irony here.
Which is?
Creators, who are often fiercely critical of legacy media's lack of independence, actually have far less institutional distance from advertisers than traditional reporters do.
What do you mean by that distance? How does it differ?
Well, a traditional journalist doesn't negotiate ad placement or content KPIs. There's supposed to be a wall between the newsroom and the advertising department. The independent creator, however, is often directly on the conference call, where the sponsor is asking, "Will you say this specific phrase?" Or, "Can you guarantee this sentiment?"
They are the entire business. Content, sales, ethics, all compressed into one person.
Exactly. And that's why radical transparency about monetization is not just an ethical choice anymore. It's a necessary survival tactic in a post-slop environment.
It seems like the solution to brain rot isn't just better content, but a more informed, critical consumer who demands absolute transparency from the sources they follow, and who understands the effort and cost involved. And that requires finding the right spaces, which leads us to part 4, fragmentation and the economics of niche. We've established that the universal town square, the one dominated by algorithmic slop, is basically dead. The future isn't about maximizing reach across one platform, but about deep engagement within tailored, specialized communities. The future, in short, is niche.
The structural data overwhelmingly supports this. We are moving away from the mass, one-size-fits-all approach of legacy social feeds and into these fractured spaces tailored to specific, highly engaged audiences.
And this is where users are actively seeking connection without the constant noise of mass-market content and advertising.
Right, because they know that a niche focus inherently cuts down on the slop.
And among these specialized, trust-driven platforms, Reddit has just exploded as a power player. It surpassed 1.22 billion global users in 2024, capitalizing directly on this crisis of trust.
Reddit's current momentum is a direct consequence of the desire for authenticity. It's gaining traction because it relies on organic, peer-vetted recommendations and discussions. Users trust the platform the most for learning about new products and brands, precisely because the system rewards real, helpful conversations over simple, paid promotion.
It's essentially a giant decentralized recommendation engine.
Driven by highly informed enthusiasts.
But the environment on Reddit demands a completely different approach from communicators and marketers than, say, Instagram or TikTok. You can't just go in and broadcast sales pitches.
Absolutely not. The rules of Reddit engagement are strict, and they are enforced by highly discerning community moderators. It is emphatically not a place for pushy sales tactics or obvious ad placement. Marketers only succeed by building genuine relationships through real, helpful conversations, addressing pain points, and providing unique value.
We've seen major corporations succeed by adopting this long-term view. How do they manage to do it?
They view engagement as a marathon, not a sprint. The Washington Post, for example, successfully engages in relevant subreddits not to sell subscriptions, but to host candid Q&A sessions about the publishing process and journalism ethics.
And the NBA does something similar.
Right. The NBA actively monitors and engages with fan communities to build loyalty and gather insights. Success requires building a legitimate presence slowly, contributing value over time, and earning the trust of the community rather than trying to pay your way in.
Beyond massive niche platforms like Reddit, we're also seeing the deliberate creation of much smaller, exclusive content channels, emphasizing intimacy and curation.
This trend is vital because it offers creators and brands control over the slop floor. We're seeing a growing reliance on subscription models and private communities platforms like Substack for deep dive newsletters, Patreon for sustained funding, and Instagram broadcast channels for intimate, curated updates.
And the purpose is to offer intimate experiences, VIP access, or behind-the-scenes looks for dedicated followers.
It shifts the value proposition from free and vast to paid and intentional, which is the core demand of the Great Meme Reset.
Now, the shift in where communication happens is reflected in a shift in how engagement is measured. We need to talk about the power metric that is replacing the public metrics of likes and comments.
That metric is the direct message share. The head of Instagram, Adam Mosseri, explicitly revealed that DM shares per reach now play a more crucial role in building visibility and reach for the algorithm than traditional public metrics like likes or comments.
That's a fundamental structural shift. It reinforces the value of intimate, person-to-person connection.
It does.
Yeah.
The algorithm is now prioritizing content that is deemed worthy of being shared privately between trusted peers. A like is passive, a share is active, and a private DM share is the ultimate trust metric.
Because it means the sender trusts the content enough to personally recommend it to a friend or a colleague.
Right. It validates the content's quality and relevance within a closed, trusted circle. It aligns perfectly with the vibe culture mandate. If the content resonates with a deep mood or a specific niche, it gets shared where trust is highest, overriding the signals of mass virality.
And the shift in who creates the content is just as dramatic. The old model of the celebrity or the mega influencer is being replaced by the authentic everyman, the UGC creator.
The influencer landscape is changing so rapidly because brands are recognizing the limits of hyper-polished content. They're finding far greater success with micro-influencers, nano-influencers, and most recently, user-generated content, or UGC creators.
And these are just regular users without large personal brands or massive followings.
Exactly, and they're paid by the brand to create content that looks and feels inherently organic. Think authentic unboxings, genuine tutorials, or lifestyle videos captured on a phone.
This sounds like the ultimate democratization of advertising. But why are these creators proving so valuable right now, especially when combating slop?
It's the cost, the speed, and, most importantly, the authenticity. First, it is extremely cost-effective. A single high-quality piece of UGC can cost as little as $20 compared to thousands for a major influencer. Second, it saves the brand production time.
But the key is the engagement.
That's the key. Audiences prioritize content that feels genuine and user-driven over heavily branded material. For instance, TikTok users are 21% more likely to engage with UGC-based ads than traditional branded content because it adheres to the human mandate. It looks like it was made by a person for a person.
So if the GMR is demanding a return to organic, human-centric culture, the economy is already finding highly efficient ways to monetize that very desire for authenticity. And nothing represents that intersection of culture, commerce, and human resilience quite like the meme itself. Let's revisit the memetic economy.
We have to understand memes as a sophisticated, flexible language. They're not just jokes. They're a cost-effective form of communication that generates remarkably high engagement rates.
Higher than traditional ads.
Much higher. Meme marketing can yield engagement rates of 30% on social media, which vastly outperforms traditional metrics like the 1% click-through rate you often see for Google AdWords. They combine cultural, political, and humorous signs into a single, highly adaptable format.
The sources break down the utility of memes into two essential functions: the joke press and the funny marketplace. What do those two roles imply?
The joke press refers to the function of memes as a source of rapid information and cultural transmission. They teach, they inform, they spread shared context very quickly. They're a powerful tool for consensus building or for critique.
And the funny marketplace.
That's the strategic use. It's how marketing managers or political campaigns deploy memes, tapping into existing psychological schemas and cultural values to make information more readily accepted, shared, or internalized by their target audience.
And this cultural utility is so profound that in non-democratic environments, mimetic language is used for actual democratic subversion and manipulating censors. This feels like the ultimate proof of human creative resilience against homogenization and technical restriction.
These examples demonstrate the inherent, unkillable political power of the meme format. The most famous case is in China. Authorities once justified censorship efforts as part of building a harmonious society, which quickly became a keyword that was frequently flagged by government censors.
So the netizens created a workaround.
Immediately, they switched the characters to create a homophonic pun that means river crab.
Which, because the term itself wasn't initially flagged, allowed them to communicate about censorship without being censored.
Exactly. The river crab meme became the codified symbol for censorship itself. And this then spawned visual memes, including the absurd image of a crab wearing 3 watches, a direct mockery of the Communist Party's political slogans, which often focused on things like the 3 represents.
Yeah, the most aggressive example is the grass mud horse.
That's probably the most famous example of this kind of resistance. The glass mud horse, which is a mythical alpaca, was created as a direct satirical response to authorities cleansing the internet of pornographic content, which was frequently just a pretext for silencing unapproved political opinions.
In the name.
The name of the animal, when translated into Chinese, phonetically means "fuck your mother."
So they created a cute mythical creature whose name was an uncensorable curse, used as a protest against the censors themselves.
It's brilliant, mimetic warfare. These coded symbols prove that even when you're facing mass homogenization, algorithmic dominance, and technical restriction, the human desire for creative, intentional expression will always find a path. It validates the core belief of the GMR. The human spirit is resilient. Hashtag tag tag outro Caro.
We've taken the deep dive into the digital crisis of slop and brain rot, traced the economic forces that are driving it, and analyzed the ensuing cultural rebellion, the great meme reset of 2026. So what's the final verdict on reversing digital decline?
The final verdict is that the GMR won't be a sudden cultural wipe on January 1st, 2026. A true reset is impossible. Once the internet is altered, you can't really put the genie back in the bottle. The infrastructure and the economic incentives, they remain.
But the movement has succeeded in another way.
It has succeeded mightily as a mass cultural feedback signal. It has accelerated the structural shifts toward intentionality that we've outlined today.
And those shifts, fragmentation, vibe culture, radical transparency, they all seem to coalesce into one core legacy.
And that legacy is the human mandate. It is the sustained, powerful cultural search for content that possesses a verifiable modicum of human thought, actively favoring authenticity, labor, and intentionality over mechanized, automated output. The solution to digital exhaustion isn't a reset, it's a conscious rebuild.
And that rebuild, as we've learned, requires consciously supporting community-led, transparent, and values-driven spaces. The underlying problem with Web 2.0 was that it provided this surveillance-subsidized convenience, right? It allowed us to get content for free, which ultimately led to this point of diminishing cultural returns and eventually to slop.
Exactly. If the internet, too, that users desire is going to be defined by quality, by transparency, and by niche focus, it requires supporting systems that are fundamentally different from the centralized mass platforms. The economic conversation needs to shift from simply criticizing AI slop for being cheap and automated to understanding the significant economic cost of maintaining human intention in a system that's designed to reward automated, cheap replication.
That is the essential trade-off we have to confront. If you demand quality and authenticity, those attributes require labor, and they cost money. If authentic, high-effort content creation is what you value most, how do creators fund that kind of quality when the biggest platforms reward speed and high-velocity, low-cost engagement?
And this brings us to the final provocative thought for you, the learner, to carry forward. What essential trade-offs must you be willing to accept and implement in your own digital life to avoid the brain rot?
Are you willing to migrate away from the infinite scroll and actively dedicate time to building those niche curated inputs?
Are you willing to disengage entirely from the algorithm and consciously curate your input via RSS feeds and curated lists, as one person in our sources suggested?
Or And maybe this is the most crucial question, are you willing to pay for content? Because the fight against brain rot isn't just a cultural critique or a technical problem. It is an economic choice about whether you value free, vast, and fast content or paid, curated, and intentional content. You can't have both in the new paradigm.